Well, good morning, everybody, to the Polar Research Board and to our guests this morning who are in the room. I don't have a lot to say in terms of introduction because it's better that we launch into the briefings we're going to receive this morning from a number of different people. So we're going to hear first from two representatives from the CLIC program, Climate and Cryosphere, of the World Climate Research Program of the World Meteorological Organization. They're deep in the WMO somewhere. And the WMO, as you all know, is a UN, United Nations organization. And then after the coffee break, we'll hear from some local Boulder Arctic polar researchers from different institutions to hear from them about what's going on in their institutions, in Boulder, and more broadly. And a point I'd like to get across about all the briefings is that our guests, our speakers, they've been conducting research in the Arctic or Antarctic or both for many, many years. They know not only about what's going on at CU Boulder and NCAR and in CLIC and so on, but they have a very broad experience and perspective on the world of polar research. So when you have questions, think about also picking their brains about what's their perspective or what are they hearing is going on in the wider world of polar research that they might share with us that we could learn from and benefit from. Sorry to put you on the spot, our guest speakers, but hi, Marika. So let's get started. First of all, the two representatives from CLIC, Amy Lovecraft from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. She's here in the room. And online on Zoom is Edward Hanno from the University of Lincoln in the UK. Lincoln's a wonderful old cathedral city in the east of England. Quite a nice place to be a professor. So with no further ado, I think Amy and Edward are going to just tag team this rather than speak in sequence, right? So I leave it to you to kick off and organize it as you wish.
So let's see, can everyone hear me? Instead of going ahead and talking them? And is that?
We'll need to use your microphone.
Oh, all right, that's fine. No worries. I'll go back here. Oh. So let's see if I can see Ed. He's here somewhere. All right, Ed, I can't see you right now on the. Okay. Excellent. Put my arm around Ed. Ed is amazing. He's such a fantastic colleague. So let me just go ahead and get started then. I'm doing the first few slides. So Ed and I were both members of CLIC, Climate and Cryosphere, which if you looked it up, right, is a core activity under the WCRP, the World Climate Research Program, which among other things feeds data into the COP proceedings when they happen. And everyone can hear me, I'm guessing. I don't see any hands. Okay, so I'm just going to proceed. So we rotated on as COVID hit, and then as COVID, those years went forward, we lost our International Program Office, our IPO. And so as everybody was figuring out how to work together over those years, Ed and I became co-leads and worked hard with, of course, other members of CLIC to keep things going. And as of about a year ago now, we have an International Program Office fully staffed at UMass Amherst. And we are reviving CLIC and getting things rolling again, because of course the cryosphere is what holds the Earth together essentially here at the poles and is of enormous importance. So this is our brief to you all, and we have our badges here. The program office, our IPO, is largely funded, almost entirely funded by NSF and NASA. So we thank them and the federal government very much. Let's see. To move my slides, do I use the arrows?
requires a little click on the screen here to recognize.
Ah,
There we
okay.
go.
Great, you can move my slide ahead. So this is what we do, right? And we've just been in a very deep dive to revise our strategic plan for the next decade, which is fascinating, of course, because it also is the decade of the cryosphere research. And within that, we also have the year of glacier preservation, right? There's a lot of attention now at the global level on the nature of the cryosphere. Which most people, of course, didn't know what cryosphere actually meant. And I love now we're seeing it in the broader public mind. So what we do in CLIC is we advance the understanding of climate-driven changes, of course, in the frozen parts of the planet, and we support the efforts to mitigate and adapt to their impacts, right, on ecosystems and human society. So CLIC is much more of a modeling organization, but recently we have moved into the area of thinking about how that modeling can help us with impacts. So there's a slight shift, but we remain primarily an organization committed to supporting what we think of as the hard sciences, right, or the geophysical sciences. And then what we do in order to do this, we ourselves, right, have researchers, and Ed, of course, is one of the foremost researchers related to, mass balance and ice loss, and he'll talk about that in a few moments. But basically, we are there looking for the key priorities, identifying these priorities related to the cryosphere, and this is going to be Arctic, Antarctic, and the Himalayas, right, or what people have often talked about as the third pole. So pretty much these are the major locations that we operate in, and the idea, right, is to help coordinate international scientific activities. We really want to bring forward emerging issues. So for example, thinking through how can science best help some of these cold dependent communities, right? Primarily in the Arctic and along the Andes, but also in the Antarctic, though we don't think of that location, right, as having sort of indigenous communities present. Along with this, right, the absolute fascinating thing, and the reason I stick with this, right, is we really try to cooperate with stakeholders and cross disciplines and locations on the globe so that there can be intercomparison conversations, not only about models, but about methods and challenges and the different kind of strategies we can take related to the cryosphere going forward. So we then turn around and work to communicate this. Now that we have this amazing IPO, we have a really good communication team. I mean, it's not large, right? A couple of folks, but they now, if you haven't visited the CLIC website in a while, please go there. We're now able to run all different kinds of cryosphere related events and activities. We are wide open, right, for policymakers, funding agencies, and in particular, trying to get this idea of a planet, right, and its refrigerators, if you want to think about it that way, out into the public eye so that people are really thinking about the nature of cold places and ice. So most of you probably know this already, but we thought it would be valuable to put this slide in simply to demonstrate that when we think about ice, right, in frozen places, we're often thinking about the services, which of course, many of you live in these places and are well aware. In Fairbanks, right, I stick my turkey outside and I don't have to put it in the freezer, right? Which we giggle at, but when you think about it, right, it saves energy, right? It saves space. So all those little attributes that the cryosphere provides us on a regular basis that we often don't think about, right, are fading. And by the end of the century, likely we're going to have substitutes for most of that. And that, of course, shifts the entire nature of society. If you have a communal ice cellar and that communal ice cellar disappears, what do? Do you privatize everyone having to put a freezer at their home? Do you create something new for the community? These are a variety of challenges that we're going to have ahead of us. Of course, more related to money and the marketplace. We can think, of course, about recreation and tourism. I was just skiing in Girdwood up in Alaska, and the richest of the rich didn't come this year because the snow wasn't perfect, right? Which for me, I love it. There's nobody there. But of course, for the business model, that causes problems. So, and then, right, we can get into dystopian futures and worry, of course, about the stable ocean current, right, which requires a certain degree of frozenness, we could say. So you have a sense of this, and enculturation, right, is just the fancy term for how indigenous and other populations, right, bring up their own children into their culture, right, using ice, or you could think of that as glacier ice, sea ice as an ecosystem and habitat for hunting. And then, of course, the melting and thawing creates problems. So we have a services model related to the cryosphere, but we also very much, of course, have a hazards problem. So we have the tragedies, of course, of avalanches, but as you can see, there's a whole longer list. When the high mountains, glaciers start disappearing, right, through the Himalayas, how are we going to get drinking water and agricultural water to the billion of people who live in China, right? So while it's not an immediate disaster, right, like the tragedies of people going through lake or river ice, we also have these really long unfolding disasters related to the lack of the cryosphere on Earth. Okay, this is us briefly. Here I am before I had my child. This is me, happy, smiling, looking really young. This is my co-chair, Ed Hannah, who will speak to you shortly. Keith Alverson is our executive director. He's wearing his click hat. Thank you, Keith, in that photo. Megan Taylor worked on permafrost in Alaska and is an incredible executive officer. And Katie Quigley is responsible for these beautiful slides and really heads up then that aspect of communication that we're working on. Let's see. This is where I'm going to end, and Ed is going to take over. But the first thing we wanted to introduce is one of the major things that Click does that's of real value. Well, it's all of real value, but I think of incredible value to the sciences is that we have connected over the years different groups and their models to enable them to have intercomparisons. So finding where there's data gaps, finding, being able to fine tune these models for better predictions. And we have 4 of them. And they're addressing, right, not only sea ice, that's actually the largest group of them now, but also the ice sheets and glaciers. So this is an example here in our chart, right, of the southern hemisphere, right, and the extent of the anomalies tracking, right, all the way back to 1979. And our other research projects, and again, what we do is while members of CLIC, either at the steering committee level or, Ed or myself, we all are active researchers, but CLIC itself, right, isn't a research organization. Rather, what we do is we collaborate with all of these different groups and provide, with the small amount of funding we have, money for early career scientists, but also for these model intercomparison projects to exist and to be able to help us understand better things like the linkages between the poles, right, looking at mass balance and the other aspects of the cryosphere. So Ed, if you're there, I'll let you take over here and you can just tell me when to click the slides for you.
Thanks very much, Amy, and thanks very much to the Polar Board for inviting us to give this presentation about CLIC. I'm assuming that everyone the sound's working okay, is it?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
So Amy's introduced some of the MIPS, the model intercomparison projects, and in fact there's currently about 14, as you can see, research activities that are that CLIC's either leading or co-leading in conjunction with other activities. Because Amy's already done a good job of describing this slide, if you can please go to the next slide, Amy. Thank you. So one of the activities is called CORDIX, which many of you may have heard of. So this is regional climate downscaling for many parts of the world, but the ones that CLICs are involved with is the polar CORDIX. There's an Arctic CORDIX and an Antarctic CORDIX as well. So these are WCRP sponsored programs to really try to improve this kind of high resolution regional climate downscaling for better climate projections and also for impacts and adaptation studies. So CLIC is closely involved with those, and this is just an example showing the circumarctic domain and some of the participating institutes for the Arctic CORDIX. Next slide, please. So in fact, there's a number of activities and co-sponsors of many of those activities. So the MIPS and the other activities that we've already mentioned are on the the first column, they're listed. So there are a variety of different cryosphere and climate and impact activities. So there's actually about 5 sea ice working groups or activities in CLIC. So I won't name all of these for lack of time, but please, obviously, some of you will be well aware of many of these or can have a look on the website for more details. But for example, the first one listed is the Arctic Sea Ice Working Group, and then the second one is the Antarctic Sea Ice Working Group. But there's groups relating to ice sheets and permafrost and oceans as well. So there's which are co-sponsored. So there's the SORP and the NORP ocean panels, for example. The polar Cordex I've already mentioned. The ISMEP 6 now running into ISMEP 7 ice sheet model into comparison project is pretty pivotal, for example, in feeding in improved projections of ice sheets mass balance for both Antarctica and Greenland into IPCC projections. So that's a fairly well. All of these programs are doing great work, but a lot of these are actually feeding into assessments of ice losses and improved projections. And you can see that the co-sponsoring bodies of these activities are listed on the top there. So, for example, CLIVAR that co-sponsors the NORP and SORP ocean panels. Another WCRP body called Earth System Modelling and Observations, which is kind of CMIP endorsed, I think. So they're involved with the ice sheet, the ISMEP 6-7. That's another kind of ice sheet interaction with the oceans, MESOMEP, and then also the sea ice model into comparison project, CIMIP. So together with CLIC, the ESMO co-sponsors those 3 activities. IASC, of course, which has a co-sponsor of BEPSI, ISMAS, an ice sheet mass balance group, and a polar mid-latitude climate linkages group that I'm going to say a bit more about in a moment. There's Regional Information for Society that is a fairly new WCRP activity that co-sponsors the Polar Cordex that I've just mentioned. Several of these groups are co-sponsored between CLIC and SCAR. And there's a surface ocean lower atmosphere study, SOLAS, which co-sponsors a biogeochemical processes sea ice group, which is BEPSI, together with CLIC. Next slide, please. One new activity that CLIC has initiated in the last year or so is this IC MONTSE, which is really looking at the kind of impacts of changes, both physical and human, in the mountain cryosphere. And a workshop is well under planning for Innsbruck this coming September at the International Mountain Conference. So this activity is co-sponsored and co-organised by the Mountain Research Institute and co-organised with INARCH, high resolution climate models for mountain regions. Next slide, please. And those of you who were at AGU recently, there was a kickoff meeting with Accord, ASSLNet, sorry about all these acronyms, but together with other mountain groups, particularly with Andean mountain researchers. And Ray Bradley at University of Massachusetts has been caretaking this group as it's been launching, and there's a new committee. I think you can have a look on the website. Next slide, please. Yes, so just mention in a bit more detail a couple of CLIC activities that I've been involved with. So on the ice sheet mass balance and sea level expert group, which is co-sponsored between CLIC, IASC and SCAR, that's held a series of regular workshops. So, for example, we held a workshop on different timescales of ice sheet variability and how interactions between ice sheet changes and climate change is important holistically across a range of different timescales, from sub-daily through to millennia or longer timescales. So from that workshop that we held, linked with a International Glaciological Society conference in Iceland about 2.5 years ago, we subsequently published a Nature Reviews paper. If you go on to the next slide, please, Amy. Thank you. Called Short and Long-Term Variability of the Antarctic and Greenland Ice Sheets. So these are real sort of community review pieces that we really engage not just world-leading researchers from trying to get diverse representation, but also a good range of excellent, promising early career researchers as well. So this came out in Nature Reviews. Next slide, please, Amy. And then for another Click sponsored activity, actually both of these activities that I kind of co-lead are co-sponsored with IASC and SCAR with this Arctic mid-latitude climate linkages activity. So the idea that very strong Arctic warming may potentially be influencing extreme weather events in Northern Hemisphere mid-latitudes. We held a workshop in my institute, the University of Lincoln, UK, about a year and a half ago, and a small workshop, but again, we had a good representation from the Northern Hemisphere, I should say, so not really any Southern Hemisphere people there. But we published a paper from this. Next slide, please, Amy. In a new IOP journal called Environmental Research Climate, about potential links between stratospheric polar vortex changes as the Arctic is warming about 4 times more strongly than most of the rest of the world, and cold air outbreaks that can influence mid-latitudes. So some of these have been experienced down the east coast of the US, for example, just this last winter. Next slide, please. And in fact, just in this in the ICARP, and I was originally intending to attend in person, and I'm really sorry I can't be there in person this time. We are having a related science session later this week on Thursday on these kind of Arctic mid-latitude climate linkages, and I'll be speaking online, but we've got some pretty high-profile speakers. That's session 1.7 if anyone's interested. So that's coming out of that Click IASC joint activity. Next slide, please. I think at this point I'll pass back over to Amy. Thanks very much.
Sure, and we're about to wrap up, but you can see one of the things that Click does is that we collect acronyms and manage them. And I say that because that chart really indicates the fact that there are so many groups, right, working on different aspects of the cryosphere and at the global scale. So what attracted me and keeps me in this particular organization is the fact that we need an organization like Click to be able to share across these different groups, to move across the different groups in ways that individual researchers may not have time or energy or funding for. So that is one of our key attributes, is to keep the best science and innovations and people doing work in the cryosphere at the fore. And as such, we are also co-sponsoring. So that's, as you see, right, a lot of what we do. We co-sponsor, we encourage, we help develop different programs. And one of them here, right, is going to be the Polar Early Career World Summit. And I don't know what we'd say, PECWIS, and it's going to be here. It is here, in fact, right? And we're doing this along, of course, with ICARP, which is another hat that I happen to wear. I'm on the International Steering Committee, and then, of course, with ASSW. So this is, again, one of these locations where students and or early career researchers can find a way to think about the cryosphere, not only from their own research, right, but thinking about it with other researchers. And as we all know, it's these kinds of interactions that often spark proposals, often sparks new research. So just very briefly, as you can read faster than I can speak, right, clearly part of what we are encouraging within this group is the shaping of polar research and priorities, because as we all know, the next IPY is on the horizon. We want to make sure that these early career researchers, if they choose, are able to find networks that support them either with funding or intellectually, right, and find other research partners. And then, of course, to amplify some of these voices, because as we grow, well, I guess we all grow older, right? We become, generally more, we often, well, that's not true. Anyways, for those who might stay in their silos, it's important for us to listen, right, to what the newer, younger scholars happen to be thinking about that we might not. So these conversations, we hope, are happening here at the Early Career Summit. And if you happen to know, because we're more of a rarity, any early career folks who are social scientists, I happen to be one, but not early career, I'm always happy to mentor. We didn't set up a very formal process, but you can always give my name out. So this is our big reveal. This is the most exciting thing that's going to happen in 2026. We are having an open science conference on all things cryosphere. So immediately folks say, well, why Wellington, New Zealand? And this is in part to bring in, right, the Antarctic right, the Arctic conversation. But we have some funding, right, both for early career scientists and as well for our Indigenous partners. We're working towards having a really fantastic conference. We'll be partnering with many different groups, as that's what we do. But Wellington, right, is one of the major university locations. So please, we have right now these, I'm just looking ahead at the rest of my slides real quick. Yeah, so we have these current partners working with us. I'm sure many of you are either in or related to some of these different groups. You can see, I realize this looks a bit like marketing, but it is. You can see the different levels of contributions. And like all organizations, right, we're fundraising to make sure that the conference is good. We have quite a bit of funding already, but we're always looking for more to ensure that the conference is as inclusive as possible. We're also working directly to connect both Indigenous communities as well as bring in, of course, people from the Andes. We often tend in our polar focus to forget about that high mountain region. So please, if you would like to be a member at any giving level, we are happy to talk with you and your organization. So last couple of slides, this gives you a sense of the themes. We are really working from a bottom-up model. So these are simply themes that CLIC members and partners have talked about for the conference, but we are already open for abstracts. And one of the things we're experimenting with, working to do, is to have these abstracts help us, in fact, form the sessions, as opposed to trying to create those boxes up front and have people squeeze into them. So these, though, are the general areas of discussion, and we have a lot of thought about things like co-production, right, other aspects, right, related to emerging methods and technologies, and then, of course, right, thinking through bipolar and third polar dynamics. So long list. You will fit in here, I promise, in some fashion. And our abstract submissions are open. So again, as I mentioned, this is the idea to begin at the early phase to see where the abstracts are leading. So please encourage your students and others, anyone doing ice-related research, permafrost, snow, water, glaciers, right, to submit an abstract. And here's how you can contact us. So we are, as you saw with our list, a relatively small group, and we are always happy to respond to inquiries, questions, and I'll take some here at the end with Ed. And so I thank you very much for your attention this morning. It's good to see the Polar Research Board, or I'll leave this last slide up, the Polar Research Board functioning and operational in these times. So thank you very much, and thanks, Ed. So we'll take questions now.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Edward. I hope you're organizing some wine tasting field trips in Wellington. There's excellent wines down in New Zealand, and not just Sauvignon Blanc. A quick word about early career. The Polar Research Board, working with the National Academies, will have an IPY workshop in about 8 weeks' time in Washington, D.C. And there would be a strong focus on early career engagement, involvement in that, to give the early career folks a voice and a say in what the next IPY might or should look like. Mm-hmm. So questions, comments for Amy and Edward? I see John Holden, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for those two excellent presentations. I have a question for Ed Hanna. And that is, I noticed in the Polar Codex that a Russian institute was one of the participants. And I just wondered whether it would be correct to assume that the Russian participation has not been active since the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, thank you for that question. So I think in CLIC, we obviously adhere to the WCRP WMO policy. I'm not directly myself involved in Polar Codex, so I can't answer your question. I think there still is some collaboration with Russian scientists, but we basically, because we're a WCRP institute, we follow the wider WMO policy. Is that there can still be some collaboration at the scientific level, as far as I understand. So I'm not involved in that, though.
No, but I am reassured by the possibilities that there is still some scientist to scientist collaboration going on. This happens to be a particular interest of mine.
Thank you, John. No, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Amy and Edward. You touched upon the human dimensions in your talk, and I just want to circle back on that. Yesterday, we had long conversations about IPY, why IPY, telling the story about that, and honing in the IPY. My question is, like, can you put in share some more thoughts from your human dimension perspectives on why IPY is important for an average taxpayer?
Sure. So we'd have to think in CLIC, we would think of the average taxpayer globally. So it could be in different countries. But one of the major aspects and why we began with Ray Bradley leading it, the ICSI-MONSI, the High Mountain Project, is because the way I think about it is value chains. So if you go to Switzerland or any other location with these glaciers, right, you have an entire value chain from the top of the glacier, right, all the way down to your local community, each section, right, dependent on the nature of that ice. So if the average taxpayer receives, like in Juneau, electricity from this water glacier process, you have to then think about, all right, you're paying for your electricity, you're paying for the nature of the turbines that might run. Well, as the glacier begins to diminish, right, the silt clogs the turbines. So all of a sudden now you have a problem that likely, if it's a public utility, you're going to have to potentially pay more either in your bill or more in your taxes, right, depending on your system, to get that electricity. So I like to think of it as not really using the word cascade, but there are cascading effects, but that each aspect of the cryosphere produces an incremental value. And glaciers are one of the easiest ways to think about it, right? Because it all comes downhill. But you could then also apply that to other aspects, right? In Alaska with our sea ice that buffers our coasts, so we don't pay taxes anyways, right? But we have an approach, right, where each element of the cryosphere generally offers services that people don't think about, but they're going to have to pay more for those services as their feature of the cryosphere diminishes. I think, does that help answer?
Yeah, no, that's great. If I might ask a follow-up one. Yeah, so I was thinking about, can you just elaborate a little more on your thoughts about people who are not living in the Arctic and the impact of the cryosphere on those people too?
Sure. I mean, and Ed, feel free to jump in with some of your examples from Greenland and sea level. He knows those facts and figures much more quickly. I think of it, right, more from the dystopian aspect that if we don't maintain, right, enough ice at the poles locking up that water, we run into the problem of, right, the temperature changes and the freshwater changes, slowing down ultimately, right, our conveyor belt current. So we could go all the way there, but that might be a bit much for the average person to accept because it seems so science fiction, right? So fantastical. So I think other elements or other ways that you could talk to the, a regular person about it simply would be, well, one is we have relatives in Iowa who keep getting these Arctic outbursts, right? So you have agriculture affected, right? As the ice diminishes and we see the climate change is happening from the, let me back up. So we have, right, as the Arctic, right, warms, those cold air outbursts coming down, right, into the lower latitudes. So we have agriculture affected. Other elements could be, pick your favorite charismatic megafauna, right? So polar bears, penguins. I mean, there's also that sort of emotional way that people think about the nature of ice. We have tourism, skiing. So I think, we could make a long list that would find any average person, and I could, with a bit more preparation, a couple of minutes, give them the facts about why the cryosphere would matter to them. But I think one of the biggest problems is going to be in the Andes and in Asia, when those glaciers that provide water for irrigation and, just regular communities, as that goes, we're going to have real problems, right? Just generally feeding people from agriculture. So it is a global phenomenon, and we try to keep our fingers right on all those parts. So our steering committee, for example, is diverse and inclusive, and has people sitting on it right from the Andes, from Asia, from all of these different areas. Ed and I just both happen to be Northern Hemisphere folks, but we are absolutely making sure that we're thinking over even into the connections with monsoons, right, and the nature of the cryosphere. So let me let Ed speak. Ed, do you have something you want to mention about a sea level rise? And then I see we have a couple more questions. Thanks, Anupma, for that.
Well, I think only that obviously sea level rise, and you've already mentioned drinking water supplies from mountain glaciers, Amy. Those are probably the two really big issues that are obviously affecting many hundreds of millions of people all around the world. So these are obviously pretty critical issues for everyone, and I think actually therefore it's very it's going to be really important to try to have that global involvement from that level and justification of what Click's doing.
Should I, or do you want to call them?
So Julie Raymond here in the room has a question.
Yeah, I thought so. I was looking here, and then I thought I just saw Julie. There she is.
Thanks, Amy and Edward, for this presentation. I have two questions. I'm kind of ignorant about Click until this great presentation. So my first question is, are there a lot of social scientists involved in Click? And unrelated, second question is, you mentioned that Click has been thinking about co-production of knowledge, and wondering if you can tell us more about what kind of thinking you all have been doing about that.
Sure. So the long story is too long, but the short version is that there's been a bit of a regime change at the higher levels of the WCRP that has tipped opinion, right, in these higher order folks to allow Click to include more social impacts. So I don't know if I was the first, but I was one of the first social scientists to come onto Click. But there was a bit of a struggle, let's say, between keeping Click very much just a modeling focused organization, and then myself with some support from others saying, well, why don't we at least talk about the value of these models to different kinds of peoples in different places. So this is quite new, in fact. So I don't have much to say about the second question, except, right, I can directly address that one of the reasons for bringing us into more of a social thinking, or at least an impacts thinking place, was that the actual users, right, of the modeling information shouldn't just be other modelers, but there should be ways to translate some of these models in different ways into the daily activity planning of people who are dependent on glacier ice or sea ice or these different features. So in that list of partner organizations, one of them was RIFS, R-I-F with a little s, all these acronyms, and that's Regional Information for Society. And that's also a very new group. They recently just formed, and right now they've just been focused on where can we create centers of information across, right, these different cryosphere locations. So the Arctic, the mountains, right? The Antarctic sort of takes care of itself in different ways that way. But RIFS is now a partner, and this is all relatively new for the WCRP. So for co-production specifically, that's something that we really hope that when we have our cryosphere conference, for example, I'm working very hard to pass off. And so I'm delighted you're here, because I want to have a side conversation. I was talking to Daly, Sambodoro about this and some others. I want to pass off quickly the indigenous component of the meeting. So myself not being well, I'm not indigenous, right? I mean, we're all indigenous to some place, but I am not an Arctic indigenous person, so that there can be more direct Maori to Arctic indigenous peoples conversations, as well as the mountain areas. So this is new, right? I know about it from my long time, at UAF, but we're trying to bring that in so we can find ways that the modeling value, right, can also take in things like local scale observations and concerns, but also so that that modeling can not only, can be learned by, so bring in new people who might be indigenous, who also want to maybe go the track of the sciences, but simply to open it up, right? To unpack it and say, how can we work better with this? And in New Zealand in particular, the Maori have been very forthcoming, or that's not the right word, very forceful in terms of talking about their knowledge of Antarctica. So that's a whole new terrain, right, of understanding that only in the last maybe 10 to 20 years, the scientific community has been willing to hear. So for me, at least, I think it's a new way for CLIC to go. We'll always remain, a science modeling comparison sort of organization, but why not, right? Why not work to be a bit more inclusive and find more ways to partner so that the value of what CLIC does can be used by local populations. And in particular, right, these indigenous populations, which have millennia essentially of experience with the ice. Thanks for that question, Julie.
Thanks, Amy. Next, we have Mike Hartinger here in the room.
Thank you for a great presentation. I learned a lot. I have a similar question to Nutma's about, why should the taxpayer care about? So I'm curious with all of the modeling activities, can you run experiments to say, for example, where there are observational gaps, like that if we had filled those gaps, we would improve the prediction of this or that parameter. I'm thinking this would be really valuable moving towards IPY5. I mean, I know a lot of really, really important and impactful networks. I'm more familiar with Antarctica, like PolNet, are being decommissioned. And I'm wondering if you can, as the modelers, tell us what the impact of that will be and why we need to keep monitoring. Thank you.
Sure, Ed, I'm going to give that one to you.
Yes, no, thank you. It's a really good question. In fact, I mentioned the new activity in CLIC that's just recently started, the IC Montsea, so the mountain cryosphere, and that's a very good example of where we really lack some fine scale observations to try to improve the models. And obviously the models are only as good as the observational data that you can test or validate them against, particularly where you've got this kind of very fine scale topographic or land surface variations. So it is on our agenda as we've been redrawing our or updating, actually a refresh of our CLIC's strategic plan for the next decade that we've just recently drawn up as well, is to really try to identify areas where we need better observations, and that could be, for example, sea ice or ice sheets or whatever. But it's no good having better and better models if we don't have the kind of data, the real on the ground data to actually go with them. So I think that's a really important point.
And related to that would be other aspects, for example, just that these stations in particular in the mountains, right, wear out or they disappear. So that's, it's just building on what Ed was saying. ICSI Montsea, right, is trying to not only rescue what can be rescued, but right, find, and in that sense that we're so collaborative, find funding, right, go out and see where, how can we do that? How can the person who lives in the valley, right, understand the importance of paying for a research station or even just a monitoring station up in the mountains? And I had no idea how many gaps there actually were, right, in terms of what are these effects of the glaciers related to precipitation, right, related to the annual snowfall. So while we, on one hand, with all our publications, we think that we know everything, but we really don't. And I think that would be one of the major highlights by having an open science conference that's global, again, is really trying to connect people who all might find themselves with the same question. Right. So that's this goal that since we in this last year are moving and have an IPO to go and use this conference as a way to think about moving towards IPY, right? Where are these gaps? Who are new people we can bring in, as colleagues and collaborators, and then have a, make that timeline a bit more precise for what activities we can do together before IPY. Thanks.
Twyla has a question. Go ahead.
Well, before I get to my question, also so nice to see Amy and Ed. But you won't maybe be surprised to hear a quick comment from me, but just given the questions even here already, it sure would be nice to see that Click Open Conference think about how we would blanket science communication into the elements so that people within those sessions and then departing maybe already have some tools and resources for connecting dots, because I think connecting dots is one of the most important things we can do, especially in this new US federal landscape. That's my comment part. But my question is if you could maybe talk a little bit about the timeline of the current Click IPO and also how folks might interact with suggesting activities or areas of focus. We were just having a conversation at dinner last night. We were talking about an upcoming sea ice school that takes sea ice modelers out to actually do field observations and see the sea ice directly. And we were discussing that, you know, I love this Arctic Mid-Latitude Conference, an area, you know, with lots of different ideas and a real need for those people to get together and dig into details and start to see where agreements might lie and what needs more research. And we were saying, you know, there, when it comes to like marine ice cliff instability, for example, some of this sort of what is really the timing and physics potential for rapid ice sheet change is another area where we see a lot of whiplash and back and forth in the published research right now. And sure would be nice to get those modelers together, but also seeing these actual physical spaces and the dynamics and heterogeneity of ice sheets or similar marine landscapes. And so I'm just curious, you know, how would you suggest such a thing? Or is that what's the timeline and sort of open space for Click to still be sort of choosing next and future activities?
Sure. And let me back up here. I was looking for this slide, right? The acronym slide. So one of the things is, so let's go back to your first question about the IPO. So the IPO currently is operating on a 5-year grant through NASA and NSF. So right now, we're okay. As we roll further out in time, I don't know, right? And I am a political scientist by training, so I need to be very careful. Let's just say, please vote in the midterms, and I'll leave that there. But right now, at least, we feel very comfortable that our funding is stable for the IPO. We are, like everybody else, careful to make sure that we maximize the expression of the fact that we, you know, do science and it really matters. And then the other activities, while they matter very much, we might speak more about here and less about if we're a federal official to ask us questions. So setting that aside, then your next question was about how we might coordinate better in using these schools. And what stunned me when I began to really dig into Click and we were able to spin up is that you probably know, Twyla, people already in these different organizations. So because we're more of a coordinator, the way that anything new could come in would be to simply, you know, use the website or talk to me with what specifically you want. And while we're quite lean, right, in terms of personnel, if there's a question or a connection you would want made, we will do it, right? We will find a way to help with that partnership. That I know we already do and we do well. So this would be, you know, the way to contact us or speak to me personally. Ed, do you want to speak a little bit more specifically about the nature of the summer schools and how those get coordinated because you've run one directly?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, it's not really a summer school that I've run, but I've run some workshops on behalf of the various activities internationally. But I think the sea ice groups in particular, as Twyla mentioned, well, there's a summer school that's either just taken place or about to. I mean, actually, in response to your question, your point, Twyla, about whiplash with some of these key science questions, I think linking between the groups even more closely is really important to try to resolve some of these really key issues. So, for example, we're going to be co-sponsoring with, well, as you've already seen, with a lot of other polar and cryosphere organizations. So, for example, Instant, which, as you know, does an awful lot of work on Antarctica to look at some of these potential tipping points or feedbacks with the Antarctic ice sheet, they're going to be a very big part of that Wellington conference. I guess it's just really trying to bring groups and people together, because quite often we still tend to work in our own areas, and I think these conferences are an excellent opportunity for people just to discuss and cross-fertilization of ideas, really, and also look at novel technologies and data in the way that perhaps we wouldn't necessarily do when we go back to the lab. So I think that there is still value in bringing people together, preferably in person. I'll say that. Sorry, I meant to be there in person, can't be there this time. But if not, then hybrid or whatever. But I think there are ways that we can get together that can really make things more efficient to help address, if not immediately solve, some of these key points.
So let me give you just a real practical insight. So one of the things that we do is Click, right, is when we have meetings about twice a year, sometimes more, we hear, right, from all of these different groups that we coordinate with, and they'll give us a brief overview of what they've been doing. So if you had, for example, a direct question, or any of you, right, that related to what any of these different groups do, we at that point would say, well, you know, I recently was talking with Twyla, and she was curious if you all were making these particular connections, right? And there we've got the leads of the groups right in front of us, you know, usually on the screen, and we can begin conversations that way. So it's not as bad as like playing telephone, right, where you're passing information along, but it isn't, right, the most efficient thing. We can't run down the hall and knock on someone's door. But I think that if you all can think of Click as a location where any sort of cryosphere question can be then dispersed out into the community, and then not just left out there, right? One of us would follow up, you know, oh, well, we had this question, you know, do you have an answer for us, or what's going on? So just the fact that Click maintains these friendly, connective, and routine, I mean, I think that's the other piece of it. Routine relationships is a major function that we can do, especially if you have an idea of a cryosphere feature, but not the people, right? We can then connect to those individuals and then turn it back off to you, so that we're not, we're the connector, but we're not necessarily the people who have, certainly we don't have the funding, right, to go down and do those specific things. But if you have some ideas, again, Wellington is 11 months away, so it's far, but it's near. We are happy to take all kinds of suggestions about different groups you might want to meet there, thinking about how we can gain more funding, maybe for very specific activities that link up specific folks. All of that is open and available with us.
Thanks, Amy. Adelheid, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Amy and Ed. Not so much a question, but more of a comment, Amy. So just thinking about, you know, the importance of not only sea ice, but also the importance of like river and lake ice, and the transportation systems in Alaska that, you know, going from community to community, and oftentimes, you know, having to do that because there's not many stores in the smaller communities. And so it with the lack of river ice and sea ice, lake ice, there's a problem there. And there was one other comment I was going to make, but I can't.
I could just respond super briefly that, that river and lake ice hasn't typically been a part of what Click has done, or people have done at a global level, in part because of the difficulty, right, of getting down into that scale. But one of the steering committee members, Sandra from Argentina, has actually been pressing a bit more for that to open up as something we think about globally. And so we have it is on our radar. It isn't neglected, but it hasn't been just traditionally part of this global package of information that people have thought about, but it's on the horizon. And I hope, right, or we're all pressing a bit, that this could become a larger part of what Click does. So as that steering committee has people who rotate off, right, we have to make sure we have diversity among the group, but we're looking and thinking about, for example, someone who might also do lake and river ice. So it's present in our minds. It just hasn't in Click's past been a regular feature that people have looked at. So thank you for.
Yeah,
bringing
thank you.
that
And I
up.
remembered the other thing I was going to say.
Please.
So with Maori, I've introduced some of them to April and Martin. So we've had some discussions there, and they're the same people that came out to Fairbanks too.
Mhm.
Yeah. So.
Well, I am looking for, Adelheid, somebody to be the key connector between Click and the conference and Alaska and New Zealand. So if you'd like to come on board, I'd love it.
Okay.
But I'll talk to you. I know you well.
I know other people.
Yeah,
too
yeah,
that
me too. So
that-
I'll catch up with you at the conference, Adelheid. Thank you very much.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. The first one is regarding the impacts of a warming, thawing cryosphere on people, communities, society, regionally and globally. And you referred to the average person, which I prefer you not to use that term. It's rather patronizing. But the average person who is not a scientist, who is out there on the street, and I realize there's this concern about overwhelming people with all these scary prospects and so on. But as I think we in the room and most other people, the one thing they do understand, if they don't understand the cryosphere and the big impacts, they do understand dollars, pounds, euros, yen, etc. And I was pleased to see that Click now has this social science element to it, and connecting the science to broader society. And I think that's very important. So on the subject of people, they understand money, cost, being hit in the pocketbook or whatever. Do you have plans to start to develop scenarios that include financial costs of cold air outbreaks into Texas, where they don't handle these things very well, or the costs of sea level rise around heavily populated coastal regions, and so on? I think that would be a great service to start thinking about the financial costs of a changing cryosphere and global climate system. The other question, before I forget it, is you mentioned communication and having information available for policymakers, for the general public, and for others. That came across as sort of passive communication. It's on the website and so on. But what are you doing actively to communicate with particularly policymakers and decision makers, getting the information into their hands in a way that they can use? That begins with actually talking to them and find out what they need, and then being able to provide it. Thanks.
Sure. So the answer to your first question is no. Excuse me. Click is not designed, nor will we become an entity that, and I guess it answers your second question in part, right? That actively goes and lobbies, or I guess lobby might be, I don't mean it that specifically as lobbying, but we are not an organization that is on the front of information communication or pushing it out, right? We remain very much a coordinating, communicating across the sciences about the cryosphere group. So what we seek to do is to have the information and to give it out to and to press our many, many different partners, many of them who themselves are tasked with actually doing what you're talking about. So RIFs, for example, as they spin up, right, within the WCRP, which you have to remember, we are within that WCRP, and we have to follow relatively strict, frankly, mandates related to how we operate. So there's nothing that prevents us, but there's only 5 of us. right at the core, then our steering committee is larger, about 14. So our model is really to bring in the science, the scientists, have them do the work, bring in the early career folks, and then, right, passively, to some extent, create packets of information that can be utilized by anybody with their own particular mission. So we will, I don't think, ever become an entity that's really pushing out or lobbying or pressing information out to the public. There's other organizations that do that far, far better than we do. Our goal is to be able to provide that type of information, maybe with suggestions, but we simply are too small and we're not funded or organized to do that. So we would then encourage, right, any of you who know organizations who want information about the cryosphere along any fashion that's, you know, scientifically sound, that's vetted, we have that and we'll place it out. And then it would be, for example, my job in my area to use that information to talk about things. It would be the, you know, hundreds of, I don't know how many people we have actually across all these affiliations, but they know best how to communicate with the right kinds of people. We help them by providing the types of information that they need. So you're right, Jeffrey, I think to use the word passive, I don't think we're entirely passive, but we're simply not geared up to be an information provider. Right. That's not how there's better people well suited in their own legislatures in their own countries to do that. And then I don't know if that answered your first question at the same time. Your first question was, okay, yeah, it's just simply not what we do directly.
So there's a question from Jenny, and then I'd like, it's time to make just a final brief comment. Jenny, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for that wonderful update on
Hey,
Click.
Jenny.
I had the pleasure of being the director of Click from 2012 to 2015 and came into it when it was relatively inactive. So I very much appreciate all the work that you guys have done
Thank you.
to rejuvenate it, because I know what's involved with that. And Ed does too. Of course, he was there with me.
Yeah.
A couple points. Lake and river ice was part of Click a long time ago, back in the day.
Lost it in the, thank you.
Terry Prowse was involved. We did a freshwater water synthesis. So there is actually some really good history within Click. The archives they were all scanned and all that. So the Secretariat should have that. And I also like the fact that you are starting to do some social science things. I hope though that your budget has increased to deal with that. Probably not, but mission creep is sometimes an issue. And so I just worry about that a little bit, because, you know, that's all these organizations have to expand and do more things, but with less resources. And so, you know, just it's a big issue.
But briefly to that, Jenny, I think that's the slowness, right? That we don't want to take on too much or say that we can do all the impacts at the same time. So, right, making sure that as we creep into that area, that what we do is sustainable and wouldn't leave partners, right, adrift if the two social scientists, for example, rotated off or something. So thank you. That's a very good point.
Yeah. And then my final question is, I see a lot of overlap still with Global Cryosphere Watch and EC4s. And like the table that you had shown, I actually made a similar one for Global Cryosphere Watch like a few years ago through contract work. Are you working together with them at all and sharing resources? Because I didn't see them on your charts.
Yeah, we are sort of, but that's been part of the new spin up. So because of our entrance into the social sciences, Click had some pressure from individuals and others at the WCRP level who weren't happy with that. And it took us about a year of having to be under review related to what we were actually doing. And then some of those individuals moving on for us to be able to fully commit to our own revision of our strategic plan and decisions about where Click was going to go. So we have consulted with Global Cryosphere Watch, but we haven't yet brought them in. We're sort of rolling towards the conference as a way to strengthen all of those connections. But to be frank, we had to get the IPO and support, and then we had this review of ourselves and whether or not we should continue to exist in the way that we were. And now we're on good footing. We're ready to go. We have, an excellent team. And so those kinds of partnerships with the others a bit more outside of just the actual science of doing the intermodal comparisons and other things. That's the absolute next thing on our radar. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And maybe we can have a side conversation about where you think the best connectors would be. I'd be delighted to hear from that, Jenny. And I apologize. I forgot entirely that you had been on Click because it didn't cross over with myself. Yeah. Thank you. Ed, is there anything you want to say about that? Or I think we're maybe moving towards the end.
Well, just very briefly that I think this goes hand in hand with the need to embrace gaps in observational coverage, whether that's a real-time monitoring network or trying to better understand past, present, future cryosphere states. So I think it is definitely our intention to strengthen that link with GCW.
Okay, I'd like to thank Amy and Ed for telling us about Click. That was a very valuable overview. It's much appreciated coming to talk to us today. Can I just make one comment? It's a more general comment. It's not about Click. Amy, I think twice you used the term hard science.
Yeah, give me a better phrase. What would I should just say geophysical sciences?
My point is that the inference on that is that if it's not natural sciences, physical sciences, biosciences, it's not proper science. And I would say all science is hard, whether it's natural sciences or social, behavioral, and economic sciences. You only offer the particle physicists and the astrophysicists the opportunity to continue to believe themselves superior to the rest of us, regardless of what we do. So I would just encourage you, don't talk about hard sciences, just the sciences, natural, social, or whatever it is.
Thank you. Thank you.
So it's coffee time. So coffee break now. We resume at 10:30 when we have our local colleagues here to talk to us about what's going on in Boulder and beyond. Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you for your help.
Click for that. Oh, dito sa Chico. Dito sa Chico. Howard Cow. And it hasn't changed.
That's a blast from the past.
From the meadow.
Yeah.
Looks like it hasn't changed. I mean, so many people don't. Well, it doesn't really do science. And people don't get that, right? I think, well, this budget, this and that. Well, it coordinates, it facilitates.
Could do a better job of communicating just what it is and where's the entry point for you.
That's right. I mean, the reality, all these things
I don't know what their budget is. What is happening? So,
like the chair.
Back in the day, the Roger Barry, he tried to get to fund the active or click off chain. And this is Mike Lindell. He said, hell no, because he was of the strong belief that NSF funding is for research. And so he wouldn't do it, but obviously the leadership changed.
10:30.
Oh, yeah, way back. Wasn't far out of grad school, young and impressionable.
Soon after I arrived at NSF, on my way to AGU, I stopped to go to a meeting to hear about Arctic observing. So I wasn't a lot to say because it was quite new.
Oh.
Let it go.
Okay.
All right, folks, it is 10:30. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Horizon Scanning panel presentations and discussions. And I just thought, given that we are here in Boulder, in the hub of where Arctic research is also happening, Arctic and Antarctic research is happening, just polar research in general, I thought it would be really good to hear from leaders in this area about their institutes, what they are doing, what research is going on, and what's on the horizon. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, and that is Michael Gozef. And Michael is a professor and associate dean for research at the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research. To the podium, Michael. Yeah.
I came with no slides, which perhaps puts an L on my forehead, but I wanted to, I'll give you a brief overview. INSTAR is an acronym for the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research. We have often asked ourselves whether we need to live to that title or not. We have had a history of scientists working around the world, and I think that there was a time when Alan Townsend was part of our institute, and he did an awful lot of work in the tropics, and it didn't matter. You know, we were really about trying to move earth science and ecosystem science forward, paleo science for that matter, worldwide, and that remains a central part of our thrust these days as well. However, I would say, just to sort of tip my hand a little bit as to where the discussion may go later, we are thinking about new and different ways of conducting research in the polar regions, and mostly in the Arctic. We've been trying to work very closely through the NNA process, for example, of working with indigenous communities. And that's been a shift for, I think, some of the people at INSTAR. That's not, I think, writ large. We have had a couple of folks sort of engage on those levels before, but now in the context of thinking about how the system is changing, what direction it's going, and how it affects the people who live there is a new and different thrust for us that we're engaging. So a couple of hires, one of them that we have going on right now is about natural hazards. You know, really thinking about someone who's interdisciplinary and thinking about not only what happens and how, but also to whom and how societies are affected. We recently had a hire that really focuses on public health, for example. And so that's another direction that we're going as we think about how humans fit into the Earth system and how it's changing. So with that, I won't take up any more time because I could probably wax poetically for a while, and nobody wants that. So I'll hand it off to the next speaker, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is Marika Holland, and she's a senior scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research.
All right. Hi, everyone. So it's good to see so many familiar faces. So yeah, I'm here representing NCAR, so the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And I just want to note, for those of you who aren't aware, NCAR is a big organization. There's about 800 people at NCAR. We're split across several different scientific labs, and there's polar research happening throughout those labs. So I'm going to try and give a pretty broad overview of the kind of work we're doing at NCAR in respect to polar climate and polar weather and science. Okay. It's not switching.
No, you're good, you're good. Just click and then it should work. There we go.
Okay. Okay, so the NCAR mission, and I'm going to have to put my glasses on, is to understand the behavior of the atmosphere and related Earth and geospace systems, to support, enhance, and extend the capabilities of the university community and the broader scientific community. And so this is something we take very, very seriously as an NSF FFRDC National Center, is this mission to support the broader scientific enterprise, and then to foster transfer of knowledge and technology for the betterment of life on Earth. So an education and outreach sort of aspect of our mission. And polar science sort of fits across all of these different aspects of our mission and includes work on near-term prediction, observational campaigns, investigation of climate variability and change, development and application of Earth system models and weather models, applied research on the consequences of changes in polar regions, and education and outreach. And as I mentioned, much of this work is really designed to support the university and the broader science community by providing tools like our models, data, and educational opportunities. So I'm going to walk through a number of examples in these areas. And these examples were provided to me by others at NCAR. And so, I'm really trying to give you kind of the broad overview. And so in the area of numerical weather prediction, one of the examples here is the Antarctic Mesoscale Prediction System. This is AMPS. This sits under our mesoscale and microscale meteorology lab, so kind of our weather lab. And it provides real-time numerical weather prediction to support Antarctic weather forecasting and science. So it's providing the weather model guidance for the US Antarctic program. And so this sits under our M³ lab, but we have other areas of numerical weather prediction research and applications of our model. We provide the WRF model, the MPAS model for people in the research community interested in NWP sort of research questions. We also support polar field campaigns. So this example is from the CSER campaign that took place about this time last year. So this was on cold air outbreaks in the subarctic region, a number of research flights in the NCAR C-130 that was outfitted with cloud probes, aerosol and trace gas sensors, a cloud radar, LIDARs, dropsondes, et cetera. And so we support a lot of field work in the polar regions as well. And this campaign was sort of coordinated under our Earth Observing Lab. We also provide a lot of Earth system modeling support. We develop, along with community partners, the Community Earth System Model, or CESM. So this is a world-class Earth system model. It sits within our Climate and Global Dynamics Lab. So that's where that's my home at NCAR. And it provides a tool that scientists can use for hypothesis testing. And we support model simulations with this. We provide a huge amount of model data. We support things like the MIPS that was talked about in the CLIC presentation, and have participants in a lot of those different MIPS. And we're currently developing the CESM3 model, which will support the next coupled model intercomparison project activities. And so under the CESM, we have a polar climate working group. And this working group is an open group, so anyone can join. And it enables a lot of community science in polar climate and Earth system variability and change. And we also provide computational resources for people to use the model. And so I have a few examples here. This model and its simulation output is used by a huge research community. So we have things about, the emergence of a new Arctic state using CESM1 experiments looking at Antarctic extreme sea ice loss events in recent years and what's driving those. And then also things looking at external forcing and how things like biomass burning emissions are affecting Arctic sea ice cover. And all of these research studies were led by university scientists. And then we also have work in the area of applied and co-produced science. This is just one example of that. So there's participation in navigating the new Arctic NSF-funded projects. This one in particular is the Arctic Rivers Project, where they're seeking to investigate the climate impacts on Alaskan and Yukon rivers, fish, and communities through co-produced scenarios. We have a lot of other work in this area as well, the Rising Voices Changing Coast program, the study of environmental Arctic change, other NNA projects as well. Okay, so in terms of our priorities and our future vision, so our priority is really to provide cutting edge research on Earth system science across the atmosphere, ocean, sea ice, terrestrial components, including things like marine ecosystems and terrestrial carbon cycles. And so, we're focused on process understanding, on predictability and prediction, on the response to external forcing, rising greenhouse gases, et cetera, and also applied and co-produced science. And a lot of our work is really focused around this mission of developing, delivering, and supporting the broader scientific community by providing model experiments, model tools, diagnostic tools, and also field campaign facilities and support. And then finally, we also have a lot of work in the area of educating and training the next generation of researchers. We have a postdoc program, we have graduate visitor opportunities, we have a lot of tutorials and trainings around our modeling tools and things of that nature. So thanks. And I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Marika. We'll hold off the questions just now, and we'll take questions and have discussions after all the three presenters have presented. So next we have Mark Serres, and he's the director of National Snow and Ice Data Center.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, well, thank you all for letting me present to you today. For those of you not from Boulder, I'm glad to see you could experience some of our mesoscale weather type patterns here, associated with strong stability aloft and strong cross isobaric flow, quite common actually here in the springtime. So you got a little taste of that. So NSIDC, National Snow and Ice Data Center. We're thinking of changing our name to the National Snow and Ice Discovery Center, because as I go along here, I think you'll see that we're more than a data center. When people think of a data center, they often think of just a server farm sitting somewhere. Well, that's not us. Now, we got the name, years and years and years ago, 1976, I think it was. A lot has changed since then. But going on here, and why is that thing not working? There we go. Okay. Yes. How are we structured? All right. So the National Snow and Ice Data Center, we are a center. We are a center embedded in an institute, like INSTAR is an institute, right? We're a center within an institute. The institute is CIRES, C-I-R-E-S, Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences. Actually, the largest largest institute within the University of Colorado. University of Colorado, as I think many of you know, is a big R1 university, and these institutes reflect that sort of structure where a lot of work is done. And the institutes may have centers. We're about 85 people. CIRES is about 800, I think, something like that, right? So that's just how it works. You can easily get lost in all of the different acronyms here and the different levels and how things are embedded. Now, just that CIRES, our host institute, is a NOAA cooperative institute. That CIRES gets block funding from NOAA, okay, to do research, especially aligning university research with federal research. Down at the David Skaggs building, you may have gone past that big NOAA building. So it's a strong partnership between NOAA and the university. And we benefit from that, especially through administrative support, things like that. But it's the largest cooperative institute out there, actually. And we benefit from that. Now, what do we do? Well, we do data management, yes, as our name at the moment reflects. We have a number of big programs big data management programs. The biggest one is the NASA DAC, Distributed Active Archive Center. One of, I believe it's 12 DACs around the nation focused on different disciplines. We are the Snow and Ice DAC. This is a NASA contract, which is a 5-year renewable contract. And we're in, I think the 6th contract now. And the first one came in 91, I believe it was. So we deal with data management of a number of products dealing with snow and ice and even very cold water. For example, a flagship product that we deal with is ASSW, right? Which is a laser altimeter system, which is used by researchers all around the world, many different applications. For example, getting at sea ice freeboard, from which we can get sea ice thickness, which is critical. And we weren't really able to get spatial fields of sea ice thickness very well in a regular basis until ASSW went up. And of course, that's paired. We work a lot with the Cryosat-2 people, which is European Space Agency, and that's a radar altimeter system. The ASSW data stream is terabytes a day that we're dealing with. A lot of that's going into the cloud now. A lot of most of NSIDC's data holdings is moving into the Amazon cloud. That's a NASA dictate. Right now, we still have a lot of our data down in a building down there, but that's moving up into the cloud. Now, we also have NOAA at NSIDC, which is different than the Cooperative Institute. It's funded differently. It's a small program in terms of money, but it's a very large program in terms of its stature. We deal, for example, with a lot of operational products that NOAA and other communities need, such as high-resolution sea ice data to know where the ice edge is. So that's working with, for example, with the Navy. We work with the Navy on that at the National Ice Center. And also another big program we have is ELOCA, which is the Exchange for Local Observations and Knowledge of the Arctic. That's been around for a long time at NSIDC. That's why we call them as programs, because they're long-standing and stable. If any of you were at the meeting yesterday up down there by the stadium, you may have heard a lot about the ELOCA project. Now, going on, our expertise in the data management side, domain-specific knowledge, of course, snow and ice. We are the most trusted name in sea ice. We even have T-shirts to prove that, right? It says it right on the back, okay? But no, if you want to know what's happening to the sea ice extent, day by day, you go to us and you go to our site where we monitor this day after day after day. We are just about to hit the annual sea ice maximum in the Arctic. It may have just turned. It's usually right around the middle of March. We're about a week or so late this year. That is not saying that climate change is a bunch of hooey, okay? It's just short-term weather variability is all that it is. Where will it be? It's probably going to be maybe the second lowest maximum, if that makes sense. We will see. But as we know, sea ice is changing. Data discovery and access, we've got actually 15 software developers in our group. Some of them work with the scientists in our research. Some of them work in the data management end of it, building applications. So you can find that data, you can use that data, you can present that data, all kinds of cool things that they do. And then user support and engagement. We have user support people. So if someone, doesn't matter who it is, anyone around the world has a question about a data set, has an issue, reports an issue, there are people there. And the nice thing is, this great thing is our people, user support, they know their business. This is not like you're calling some call center or something. These are people who know those data sets, know how to get around them. Often they have scientific backgrounds, right? So it's not just, we're just dealing with this in a vacuum. Trusted data principles, and an authoritative data archive that we focus on long-term preservation. As I noted, our data is going into the cloud now. That's the big change that's happening. In terms of our research, many different areas, sea ice processes. Of course, we monitor the sea ice cover, but we do all kinds of work on sea ice variability trends, Our NSIDC has worked closely with Marie Holland, for example, at NCAR on a lot of this sort of work. Ice sheets, glacier process. Where's Twyla? Twyla's back there, right? Greenland ice sheet, right? We deal with the Antarctic ice sheet. We're just wrapping up a big project on the Thwaites Glacier, right? The Doomsday Glacier, right? But we've been working on that. Permafrost dynamics, as anyone who's been in the business knows, permafrost is a big deal in northern high latitude, notably the thawing permafrost for a number of reasons. One of them being permafrost carbon feedback, all that carbon locked up in those permafrost soils. You thaw that permafrost, the microbes in the soil become active, and what do? They eat the carbon and release it back to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide or methane. Informatics, right? Data science, right? And AI, we are strongly involved in that and more and more and more. We're dealing with big data issues today and a lot of research, and we're doing that at NSIDC. Snow melt, stream flow monitoring, atmosphere ocean interactions. Hey, how is the atmosphere and the ocean talking to each other? That ties right back into some of the sea ice work that we do in collaboration with a lot of outside people, and of course remote sensing. Now, this I'm just going to show you a few recent highlights. This is actually from 2023. We have more coming, but this is just to show you a few things of what we've been doing. NSIDC website, the new website. All right, we have a new Drupal-based website with good content management and all this. What an ordeal this was, because like so many organizations, we start building a website through the years. We started in the early 1990s. You go back to the Wayback Machine and see what we were doing, right? And you add to it, and you add to it, and you add to it. And at some point, it becomes this totally unmanageable monster that you fix something and it breaks something else, right? So we had to pull the whole thing down and basically start from scratch, which we did, right? And so you may not notice it if you go to our website because it might feel the same in a sense, but that's because it was cobbled together and now it's nice and smooth. The inner workings have all changed. We got the new DAC contract. That's the NASA DAC contract. Remember, it's on a 5-year renewable thing. We got a new one. Hopefully, cross our fingers, right? NSIDC Science is doing a lot of work with the NOAA 2023 Arctic Report Card. Of course, Twyla, Matt Druckenmiller leading efforts in that direction. Number of NSIDC scientists participating in this in terms of the sections on sea ice cover, or in my case, Arctic precipitation. And of course, we are leading the navigating the new Arctic Community Office. And that was all the thing going on at the stadium yesterday was about the NNA. You know, just kind of our page views, things like that. A lot of people come to our site, right? A lot of people come to our site to look at what's happening to the sea ice core. We used to say that people would come to our site to look at the sea ice extent, like people used to come to see the box scores, baseball box scores, back in the day when people did that, right? But people want to know what is happening. We're already getting media requests now. When's the sea ice maximum? Things like that. Key research that we've been doing. Atmospheric rivers, right? Of course, everyone and their brother's doing atmospheric rivers these days, so are we, right? But we're very interested in these things and how they relate to like rain on snow events in the Arctic. We have a large project under the Navigating New Arctic focusing on rain and snow and its impacts on, for example, reindeer herding. Polar bears living on small icebergs instead of ice floes. And I think Twyla was involved in that work. The impacts of blizzard events on Arctic community of Clyde River, a very unusual series of events that really caused a lot of problems and a lot of lessons learned. Rain on snow over the Arctic Ocean, which is, of course, has a lot of effects. And one of them is on how we can monitor the sea ice cover because the rain on snow can really mess things up. The last year, the sea ice minimum, right, was 6th lowest. Not that spectacular, but here we are now at the maximum, right? Roughly 6 months later, and we will see where we stand. Antarctic sea ice, anyone's been following this knows that Antarctic sea ice cover has been behaving very, very strangely. Huge variability, no real trend, and then suddenly the last few years, it's kind of like dropped like a rock. We don't know what's happening. Is there a greater influence of Warm ocean waters getting to the underside of the ice, it's not quite clear. Greenland's surface melt. Another thing we monitor is the melt extent over the Greenland ice sheet. It uses the same instrument as we use to monitor the sea ice cover, which is the SSMI data stream, at least for now. Last year, we also monitor snow conditions over the US West. Last year was a good year. This year, good in some places, not so good in another, but we are looking at it closely. We have a strategic plan, as we should, and we're working on a new strategic plan now, a revised one. These are just some of the key objectives that we're hitting on. And one of the real important things about NSIDC, which is reflected in our strategic plan, is the partnership and the alignment between our data management and our research. We combine them. We try to marry them, because that makes us for a stronger center. You're dealing with the data, but you're doing the research at the same time on those data, which means that you've got people at NSIDC who know their business. And I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We're going to open up to questions here and online. Martin, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Anupma. My question is primarily for Marika, but I'd welcome comment from Mark or Michael. The Polar group at NCAR is deeply involved in modeling. You gave a number of examples, and I'm particularly thinking of CESM. And are people using that model, people at NCAR or in the wider world, to test some of these Dr. Strangelove ideas on polar geoengineering and its consequences and so on?
Don't ask me to
So yes, there's actually a lot of geoengineering related work using the model to explore different potential climate intervention strategies, things from marine cloud brightening, so changing particles in the atmosphere, to changing albedo on the sea ice through various methods. So it's a very active thing. There's some of that work being done at NCAR, primarily more in the area of cloud modification, solar radiation management kind of activities or possibilities. But there's also, the model is freely available to anyone. So you could all go home or even from the desk right here and download our model. You kind of need a supercomputer to run it. And so, but yeah, we've all got those in our homes now. Anyway, we also do provide computational resources. So anyone with an NSF grant can actually get resources on our computing, on our supercomputer. DOE has their own supercomputers, et cetera. So there are those kind of resources around, of course. And so, we don't know all the work that's being done with our model, honestly, because scientists can take it and do their own studies. But I think in the broader research community, I know of some studies that were led by university scientists that are doing geoengineering related work with CESM. Yeah.
Is it still in Fortran?
It is still in Fortran. There's a lot of work to embed machine learned parameterizations into CESM. So, and those are usually written in Python. And so we have kind of bridges between Fortran and Python that are being incorporated into the model. But most of the code is still in Fortran. So Mark, you can still go in and modify it.
Thank you, Marika. We have Julie and then Ross and then John. So Julie, go ahead.
Thanks all of you for that information. My question was about open data, and I'm curious if you could say a little bit about how you're addressing Indigenous data sovereignty within that context. And I'll exclude Rising Voices Changing Coast from that? Because I'm familiar with that one, but maybe for the other work that you're doing?
Well, I can say that, of course, we're involved in that, and it's just data sovereignty, and it's a very sensitive issue that we always have to be aware of. This is mostly under our ELOCA program that you just got to be aware of it and what the people you're working with want to do, right? We don't make those decisions. The people that we work with make those decisions to how that data can or even should be accessed. Now, of course, open data, open science, when it comes to, sea ice or something, it's a totally different thing. But when you're dealing with working with people of the North, it is just something. It's a completely different ball game. And you have to be very sensitive to the wants and needs of those you are working with, and just listen.
Maybe just a quick follow-up to that. Outside of ALOCA, are you involved in developing like data management agreements with partners around Indigenous data sovereignty?
I'm not prepared to answer that question. I think you'd probably want to talk to Matt Druckenmiller. I'm not sure if Matt's around now, or Twyla. He might know something, but I'm not prepared to answer that. I just don't know.
Sorry, Mark, we're not doing. Yeah, I'll just say at Instar, we've really been doing this on a project by project basis, which is probably the best way to engage in any event. But for example, Marika mentioned this NNA project focused on thinking about how river flow is going to change. And I happen to be a co-PI on that project, and we've really worked hard to engage communities. We started with a watershed group for the Yukon, and it was amazing how that became an entree to, because watersheds do such a great job, and at the scale of the Yukon, do a great job of integrating a lot of folks and a lot of villages and communities. So I would just say that we've been very sensitive to this as well, and asking the question and really trying to have a deliberate conversation about what is permissible, not only for us to learn, but then to also report as well. And I think, I think one of the lessons that we've learned, and I'm not sure we predicted this the way it would go, but how do you take the kind of data that Mark was suggesting is out there, whether it's sea ice, or in our case, looking at US Geological Survey runoff data, or we're looking at meteorological data, and mix those then with the data that come from communities, and that becomes obviously a different challenge. And so we've been very deliberate about just saying, this is the story we want to tell. Can you help us write this story? And then what is appropriate to and allowable to go beyond generating the story as far as reporting goes. So yeah, great question.
Thank you. We'll move to Ross.
Yeah. Hey, Ross, we can't hear you. Hang on just a sec.
Ross, do you want to put your question in the chat? And in the meantime, we're also going to try fixing this audio. Russ, can you try speaking one more time? No, all right. John, can you try speaking so that we see whether it's our issue at our end or just Ross's?
Can you hear me? I'm speaking now.
Yeah, we can hear. All right, John, let's take your question first, and then Ross, if you can put your question in the chat, we'll take that after that. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. I have kind of a wonky question for Mark. In your presentation, you gave us a number for the 2023 Arctic sea ice minimum, which was the sixth lowest on record. But you didn't give a figure for 2024. And when I looked online at the NSIDC site, on the graphic of Arctic sea ice coverage, the line for 2024 stops in August. It now being March of 2025, I'm wondering what I missed. that has delayed the appearance of the findings for the
That
minutes.
shouldn't be the
2024.
case. Are you looking at, yeah, you're looking at the monthly or the time series for each month?
No, I was looking at, there's a main graphic that has trajectories of sea ice for the latest year, for the average of recent years, from
I have to check.
1979.
I have to check on that. If there's a problem, there's a problem, and we'll fix it. I'll talk to Walt Meyer on that. I was not aware of that. So thank you. That's not a good thing if that's the case.
All right,
Sure.
John, do you have a non-technical question too?
No, I don't tell. That
All
was
right,
my
thank you.
sole wonky question.
That's all right. We'll check it.
Thank you. I got Ross's question over here. He says Boulder has a huge presence in the polar research community. Have discussions about IPY5 taken place and about the priorities?
Well, they're taking place, and it's coming up, and we'll get ready for it. Michael, maybe you have some words on that.
Yeah, I guess I would say at the moment they've been a bit informal, just in thinking about what scale. I think we can all dream up a lot of wonderful ideas, but we don't quite know at what level we will have the types of participation and teamwork from other collaboration from other countries. And I think even the internal funding within the US, there's some concern about how much support there will be. So I think Ross is probably right to point out that maybe we need to start having more formal conversations. But I also hate to get us ahead of, say, the PRB, for example. Having served for 2 cycles on the PRB, I always appreciate that input, but don't want to get ahead of you all either. So happy to provide input.
Yeah, I'll just say at NCAR, I think it's also very informal and sort of individual scientists, having conversation, but not kind of as an organization. So that's definitely something we need to do more as IPY comes up.
Excellent. I think forums like today's are the ones that build up the momentum. So when you go back, it's probably going to ramp this up too. So thank you so much for that response. I'll go to Martin and after that to Jenny. Martin, go ahead.
Marika, I'm sorry to aim my questions at you, but here I am again, another one for you. The Antarctic mesoscale modeling and the weather forecasting prediction. Could you tell us what you can about the sort of satisfaction of the customer with the products you're providing and how they're helping with operations? So on, they have a big air force, for example, which benefits hopefully from good weather forecasts to optimize operations and so on. Could you comment on that?
So I'm not directly involved in AMPS, and it actually sits in a different lab than the lab I sit in, and even in a different building, because we have 3 different campuses for NCAR. So Jordan Powers would be the person to contact for more direct information. AMPS has been around for quite some time though, so I expect that there's at least reasonable satisfaction with the products. Otherwise, they probably, NSF and the U.S. Antarctic program would be looking elsewhere. So I think, just given the fact that its longevity, I think it's been quite successful. I will also say that the AMPS forecasts are available to the research community to go back and look at, individual extreme weather events or things like that, and look at their predictability and how well they were predicted and things like that. So there's also sort of this nice research archive of those forecasts available to do that kind of science as well. But yeah, sorry, I can't provide more direct and specific information.
Thank you, Marika. Jenny.
Thank you very much for those wonderful talks. And Mike, as always, you're always short. But so 20 years ago, I was here finishing my PhD, and I remember then there was tons of polar work going on, and it seems like it's just exploded. Do do you guys all get together and share polar research that's going on? Is there like a Boulder Polar Conference or something like that? It just seems like there's so many opportunities for people to collaborate. I wonder if you, I mean, I know it's hard because everybody's got things going on, but I just wonder.
My answer to that is that we need to do more of it. Right? There's a lot going on, and certainly scientist to scientist, we interact, but I'm working closely with Nikki Levidinsky, who's the INSTAR director now, to really get NSIDC and INSTAR collaborating more, because we have so much to offer each other. So we have these ice cream socials now. We've got a couple of joint proposals out there and joint efforts going on, but it is something that is recognized that we need to do more of. The problem typically is physical separation, right? It's a big campus. We've got INSTAR down on the East Campus. NSIDC is in the East Campus, but still half a mile from where the SEEK building is. And we've got all the stuff going up here, right? And often that is the biggest challenge, is physical separation.
I'd say on the modeling side, through because a lot of the modeling, kind of Earth system modeling work that's done at the university uses CESM. And so we all do collaborate under the CESM Polar Climate Working Group. So for example, Nikki Lewandowski comes up, one day a week to NCAR. She's got a visiting position there. A lot of the Atmosphere and Ocean Sciences department graduate students have visiting positions up at NCAR. And, I have a sea ice group meeting every 2 weeks and it's filled with CU students. So, but it still is a little bit informal. And I'd also say that it would be good if we broaden some of that beyond the modeling, right? I mean, so working more closely with INSTAR and with NSIDC, and I mean, I think that's happening on individual scientist level, but yeah, a Boulder Polar Conference is actually a great idea. So.
Yeah, I'll echo all of that. I think the time is right, and particularly as we think about how the landscape may be changing, both literally and from a funding perspective, it's probably high time for us to spend time sharing what we do. I mean, I think some of us have a better finger on the pulse of what our colleagues are doing in other units across campus and at NCAR, and some don't. And there's ripe opportunity for trying to put all that together. Give your speed dating kind of quick talk, which apparently I will not show up with slides for, and then think carefully about, to collaborate, we don't necessarily have to go across the country, right? We could go across town or just across campus to try to find that. And, we might as well build that synergy here. So easier than doing it somewhere else, or letting another institution try to do that instead. So, yeah.
If I can just have one more.
Sure, go ahead, Jenny.
And then on a different note, are there things that you would like to see the PRB do to help the polar science community in general?
Well, I guess I'm not quite sure. I was around for the last IPY, but I never understood how it sort of formed and got going and got steam, because on some level it seems like there's got to be a bit of a global agreement as to what years it's going to be, and that everyone kind of gets aligned and so forth. I think just thinking about that as a potentially near-term opportunity, it would be great if there was some synergy around that kind of moved beyond the PRB, right? That pulled in some other experts. And that's not me volunteering. That's just me saying that trying to get the word out on where those opportunities might go would be great. Now, I recognize there are some limitations to that, but at least in the context of trying to put together, what that map looks like would be wonderful. And I believe that's coming up in May. Is that right? There's a meeting in May coming up.
Yeah, so Michael, we have series of meetings that will come up also, but just yesterday, we had a great discussion. We had international partners coming together. There's a timeline presentation. There's a very good flyer out there, which talks about, but the date is, the year is fixed, so we are ahead of
Okay,
last time.
wonderful,
So,
wonderful. Thanks. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, you know, we are dealing with great importance of environmental research, whatever it may be, is falling on deaf ears. What ERB and other agencies do, or other organizations do with their clout, okay, to make the voices heard at a higher level. We're scientists. I'm a simple scientist, right? It's all that I am, right? But how do you get the voices heard of the importance of the research that is being done when you are dealing with those who are a bit hard of hearing?
Mark, I know, Martin, your hand is up. I am going to take this opportunity to ask you a question, Mark. In fact, the whole panel a question, because we've been talking about our communication strategies and how we talk about IPY. You all had excellent scientific presentations here. Just my question is, why is the work you do important? And how do you communicate about it? Because if we hear more about that, that's the message we take forward for the why of the IPY. So would love to hear just a high level response.
Well, I mean, publishing our papers is not going to feed the bulldog, right? At NSIDC, we have a strong social media presence, getting the word out on the importance of the work that we do. But of course, as we know, Twitter has gone in interesting directions. Okay, we're looking with Blue Sky or things like that. But that's what you, to reach out, this is the things you've got to do. We got to get out of our towers here and realize that just publishing papers isn't it, right? But how do you amplify those voices? We can amplify to a certain extent, right? But the voices need to be louder.
I mean, I'd say, you know, changes in polar regions have impacts on everybody across the globe, right? So, I mean, there's the local impacts, which are dramatic and heartbreaking. And then there's the fact that with the loss of sea ice in the Arctic, it amplifies warming globally. It's not just a local phenomenon. Sea level rise affects all coastal communities, right? So these things are not just a polar problem. They're a problem for humanity at large. How we communicate that and get that message out and stress that and are still allowed to use words like climate change is, you know, a situation that we find ourselves in currently that's very difficult and complicated, and figuring out how to, I agree with Mark, how to amplify this message, how to bring it home to people that these issues are important for all of us. They're important for our children. They're important for our grandchildren. This is not just a now problem. This is a problem that we are going to have to deal with for decades to come.
One thing to add to that, right, is that this is a story. Last year, I was invited down to the Army War College down in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, because they wanted to know what's happening, right? I've dealt with people from the Navy, okay, from the Air Force, from US Northcom. They're all dead serious about this. People seem to think that the Department of Defense and Coast Guard are poo-pooing climate change. That is wrong. They are absolutely, totally on board with this. And is that an area where, you know, sovereignty, defense, okay, where one can make the voices heard? I realize that that is not where some people want to go, you know, in this. I understand that. But this is the reality on the ground as well, that DOD absolutely knows what's going on, and they want to hear from the scientists. They say, they told me, I don't want to listen to some blog or something like this. I want to listen to what the scientists have to tell me.
Yeah, I think, so I think what Mark just said was something I wanted to kind of hit on as well, that I don't know that you're going to convince the highest levels of decision makers from the top down. I mean, some people who are out looking for news and information will try to find these stories that we have about discovery, but those who don't, I think, that can still be affected by those discoveries, you kind of have to work strategically with those who really want to find that information. So thinking about, you know, I'm just going to say lower level, just in the context of the military, you know, the Navy cares about sea level rise. Where do they have most of their installations? Along coasts, right? I mean, and the fact that, yeah, at sea level, right? Well, and they're rising with the sea level, right? So, you know, I think that there are ways to try to be strategic about that. We should have our doors open, but we should also find a way to engage with those folks. And that's not been our expertise. I think it just sort of thinking about my own circle of sort of scientists that I work with. But that's a different kind of outreach, right? That is not just K through 12. That's not just trying to kind of reach out to folks in your congressional delegation. It is a little more deliberate and yet still has a really important effect and important impact, I think. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Martin, I know you've got your hand up, but if I might ask you to wait for a little, I know Kristen has a flight to catch, so I'll let her go first.
Okay, thank you. Some of the points I was wanting to make have already come up with this conversation about how can we, as a polar research community, demonstrate value using the word that you brought up earlier today. I think the idea of demonstrating value and maybe urgency might be ways for our community to come together. Now, the three of you said, you know, you're physically separated, it's hard to come together, but maybe that's the conversation to bring people together around, like, okay, what are 3 ways that we can demonstrate value to someone who does not live here, who does not know about the research that you're doing, who does not live in a polar region or near a polar region. And maybe the Polar Research Board has a leading role in this. I'm not sure, but as a whole community, I think we need to develop a short, like 1-pager with aid for language development that can be appropriate to the audience that we're trying to reach about what is the value to this broad community, to citizenship, certainly within the United States right now, but also globally. It seems like this might be one of our most urgent needs in the next, honestly, I'd say 6 months.
Kristen, thank you so much for your question. I see a lot of nodding heads, which means everyone is agreeing with what you're saying over here. And maybe that's what we're going to start working on. But go ahead, Marika.
I completely agree. And I think we also need to figure out how to bring in artists and filmmakers. And, you know, because honestly, like, I can write a science paper. I've done a lot of that.
I've done it with her.
Yeah. But yeah, Mark makes my science papers better. But you know, I think we also need people who can communicate a message in different ways. And I know we are at NCART. I think that's true probably at many institutions. We are working with artists. We are, you know, but I think we need to figure out how to do that better. And I think there are people out there that want to help us tell these messages.
If I could jump in, I think it needs to be a common message, almost as if there was a 1-pager with signage from institutions and organizations, but it's not it has to be so carefully crafted that's the challenge.
Music is an opportunity, eh? All cultures. No, I could. I've written a number of protest songs that I've recorded, but music that's what makes humanity is music. All cultures everywhere have a common thread of music of different types, right? And that is a way that you can reach people. We need, like, you know, the U2 of the crying, you know, of climate change or something like that.
Generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. From the audience, we have Amy Lovecraft, sorry. Yes, please come up over there. So.
I'll just stand here. That's okay. Thank you. My question was, we've talked about a lot of these different actors, but one we've left out is industry, right? And the marketplace. And very obviously, marketplace actors from food production, right, to infrastructure, so on and so forth, are all directly affected by what we're talking about and these changes. And yet, of course, most of what they do in terms of their own in-house science is proprietary. So what I'm wondering just in general is, maybe this isn't a PRB, or maybe it is really a PRB issue, but maybe not with this administration at this moment. But what can we do to reduce duplication, for example, of in-house and public science? And what could we do to, get this message where people see it every day, right? You go buy a can of Pringles, and on that can of Pringles, there's some QR code that tells people to donate so that glaciers, can transition and we'll still get our water to make Pringles. That's just the first thing that came to my head. I have a 12-year-old child. But this, right, this is a very different version of public exposure to these issues, right? Is the things that people buy every single day, or the processes that, I don't have another word yet for the average person, but that just we do in daily life repetitively. That seems to be where we get people, right? Not asking them to come to places to listen to us. So I just don't know. I just wanted to bring up that marketplace aspect, and was wondering if anybody is working on that or has thought about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to circle back finally, Martin, to you now. Maybe you even have a response for Amy, and then you have your question.
So many things.
Mike.
I have more than, sorry, I now have more than one thing than I was going to originally bring up. So if you'll bear with me, I worked for the Office of Naval Research, and I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. So I know a little bit about defense and national security from an S&T and R&D perspective. And I echo what was said to my left here about the military. It gets it about climate change, environmental change, and consequences for its operations and the national defense and so on. And there's some very smart people in uniform who have the power of the purse, if you will, admirals and generals and so on. It's a part of the challenge is to find the right people to talk to. And maybe we could start doing that within the academy by talking to the numerous boards in the academy that are funded by different parts of the Department of Defense. There's a Naval Studies Board. I think there's an Air Force Board. There's an Army Board and whatever. Talk to the staff and even the members, the outside members of those boards, and who are they talking to in the Pentagon and elsewhere who get it, who might be able to free up some funding for the necessary kinds of research they're interested in, things they need answers for, and so on. You have to remember that ultimately generals and admirals, their ultimate responsibility is to make sure that the warfighter is properly equipped and trained. And many of them, they look at S&T and R&D as a drain on the budget, that it ought to be going into training and operations and platforms, ships and tanks and all that kind of thing. But there are the ones out there who take that seriously, but they also understand the importance of R&D and S&T and are willing, will entertain discussions and so on. So I had a third note on my agenda here that says IPY, and I'd like to circle back to IPY and then maybe beyond IPY. You said you've had some early informal discussions, so that's fine. But individually, would you care to comment on what you think the fifth IPY might look like, what it ought to be? Each IPY has kind of had its own flavor and focus. The first one was about Arctic meteorology, to a lesser extent about Earth magnetism, but it was mainly focused on how does the Arctic weather work and affect lower latitudes. Even then they were thinking about how the Arctic weather affects the mid-latitudes. Second IPY largely lost to history, but meteorology was an important element of it. Third IPY, IGY, was originally primarily about the upper atmosphere, the ionosphere, aurora, disturbing communications, and so on. Our fourth IPY, I forget what that was about. So we have a fifth IPY. Looking in your crystal ball, what do you think it ought to focus on, perhaps? What do you see as potentially the most important topics? And can I just ask think beyond IPY and thinking of polar research, polar science, and engineering more generally, where do you see it as going? What are the emerging topics in both the research and methodologies, the way we study the polar regions, and so on?
Thanks. So it strikes me that I wonder if the next IPY, and it's not that we don't do this already, but what if it really focused on trying to convey the importance of the poles to everybody else? I mean, it's one thing to say that we're going to go better understand the polar changes, and I don't think anybody in the scientific community would argue with that. But what if we really turned this around and said that the next IPY is about getting everybody to understand and appreciate the polar regions for what they are and what they represent and how we're connected to them? And I know that sounds a little bit silly in the sense that we all have different ways of trying to do that, and it's not that people aren't doing that now, but it just seems like that still remains a bit of a missing element of the goals that we all have as a scientific community. And I'm not biased by the recent conversations, clearly.
So yeah, I mean, I like that idea. I also, I think that to do that means we need to really focus on the coupled Earth system and the implications of the coupled Earth system in polar regions on the rest of the globe. And I also just would like to make a plea that we include modeling activities and Earth system modeling activities from, the initial planning for IPY. It often IPY, has traditionally, at least from my perspective, been more of a observational focused activity. And I think that we have a lot to gain from better integrating models and observations in the planning for IPY, as well as in the outputs from IPY that will, likely help us improve our models. So I think that we should be thinking as a community how to really integrate modeling activities from the get-go into IPY.
I guess my view, having watched what's been going on for a long time, it's time for a dope slap, fish or cut bait at this point. Everything is upon us now. The alarm bells are ringing. Get on board, folks, right? The message seems to be, it's not getting late, it is here. And whatever we can do to demonstrate the urgency of what is happening is the way to do it. And if that comes across as a bit less scientific than something else, I would say, so be it.
Go ahead, Martin.
So thank you for that. I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said. And I think we have the elements of a beginning of a framework to craft an international polar year. I agree with what Mark says. We really do have to fish and cut bait that yet another international polar year where we all go off and do some basic curiosity-driven research is not going to hack it. I would refuse to fund that if it was in my power. The idea of getting modeling more centrally involved, I think, is a good approach. It's one that I've been thinking of because modeling is essential to forecasting and prediction. And we need to improve our forecasts and predictions of the system and the different elements and how they affect people. And that's a way to demonstrate why the polar regions matter to you, by helping people see that the research and development and so on is being directed at meeting their needs. So we need to find out, what are the needs? Scientists generally think they know what's needed, but they don't. We need to consult. So I made a plea yesterday, sorry, Anatma, but I'm on my soapbox now. I've been stressing yesterday and even before that we need more action-oriented research, use-inspired research. That would make this IPY very different. And to come out at the end of it or during it and after with real products and services and solutions for people, not just in the polar regions, but also more broadly globally. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have a quick comment before? Yeah. I have Twyla first and then Adelheid, and then I'll get back to Amy.
Yeah.
All right.
She let me go, but I just wanted to add to the conversation here a little bit. And I wanted to talk about it's a report that's done by the largest Alaska Native tribal organization in Alaska. It's the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and they did a report. It's called The Unmet Needs of Environmentally Threatened Alaska Native Villages. And you know, this information in here, you won't see in mainstream media. And so it talks about the national significance, the critical importance of protecting Alaska Native communities and cultures. And another part of it is the national significance, a model to prevent disasters nationwide and reduce federal fiscal exposures. So looking at us like as the bellwether, which I think we are, but you know, people all over the nation have been displaced. All of this infrastructure has been, you know, devastated. We have like airports and harbors and all kinds of things that, you know, the state of Alaska has put this tremendous amount of infrastructure in these rural communities that are threatened now. So anyway, I just wanted to mention this. And you know, I heard Marika talk a little bit about the global scale, and then and Michael talk about the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council. And the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy, we have these small grants where we go out to these communities. Well, actually, we've given small grants, and then to the more like the nonprofit parent organization, and then they trickle down to tribes. But there's just a lot of work out there that needs to be done. And there's just the lack of capacity at the local level, very lack of capacity. And that's why, you know, the regional tribal nonprofits try to step up, but also they're totally exhausted from doing a lot of this work as well. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to return a few comments earlier, just the nature of hand raising. First, I wanted to note something that I think is quite laudable at NSIDC. Certainly part of the reason that I enjoy being there and is that we have a science communications group. And I think that's kind of unusual for a center like ours. So we have professionals who their job is thinking about press releases and general understanding articles and social media and engagement with the public and creating materials that are used by educators and things along those lines. And I think that's really valuable, helping media and journalists connect to experts who can answer their questions, this sort of thing. CERES are the institute we're under has, of course, also a communications group that provides great support. But I think in many cases, I see it myself, we don't generally have a structure in, I'd say science writ large, at least within the US, that supports scientists to do this work or says this is something you can pursue and you can have a career space in which you can be a scientist and you can be working on connecting the dots and speaking to others. I mean, I took the initiative upon myself to say, I'll be in DC in January. I'm going to create 2-pagers. I'm going to meet with people. CU's Office of Government Affairs was happy to assist. Ceres was happy to assist, but they were not asking that of me. They were not paying me to do that. Of course, they couldn't in some ways, but I think we really have a issue in regards to the structure of science that has seriously gotten in the way of this interpretation space. I'd be happy to tell people more about things, but I won't go on about it right at the moment. I have been working against this for a very long time and been incredibly surprised at how hard it is. Although hats off to Ceres for making some progress. I'd be happy to talk to people about individually. And I do think we need the message, but I actually want to push back a little bit, Kristen, about your comment and maybe evolve it in that we have a single message about the science, right? There is sort of one physics, there is one chemistry, the kind of what is happening, what we can observe is a single reality. But that's, I think, as far as the singularity of a message can go, because fundamentally to connect it, it has to split into the literally millions to billions of audiences that are needed, and they represent thousands to millions of different value spaces. And creating a single message is, I think, a very rapid way to not be heard by the vast majority of people. And I think we are sometimes not aware of the homogeneity of ourselves as earth scientists. We tend to sit in kind of a certain space of how we think. We tend to sit in a certain space of what we value. And that really gets in the way of our connecting with many different people. And we have to be thinking instead about a very wide diversity of messages that are about the individual delivering the message and about the very specific audience they're dealing with. I see it so often with science communication. You say, scientists, who do you want to communicate to? And they say, non-scientists. That's not an audience. That's everyone outside of science. That's no way to understand how to connect to people. So I think we do have a lot of challenges in this space. And I would think that by maybe very big encouragement of real shifts in our structure and our valuing of work and our creation of job spaces are maybe just some of the ways we can make a bit of progress.
Yeah, Twyla, great thoughts over here. You've left us open to thinking a lot more and a lot more breadth in thinking and a lot more depth in thinking. Just logistically, we will try to wrap up here 5 minutes before 12, just so that we are ahead in the line for lunch. And just to let you know that. And then, Amy, I know you've got your hands up, but I do want to do a time check, not at the last minute, a little before that. And just to tell you the logistics after that, we will come back here at 1:30 for a closed session. But again, going back to the questions in the room, we had Amy, and then Martin again, and Allison after. Okay, so Amy, Allison, and then Martin.
So this goes back to the Pringles example, but also to you, Twyla, and what you're saying. I mean, to me, this next IPY needs major corporate funding. And so what I think a lot about is that if corporations can pivot from month to month, right, for Black History Month, for Women's History Month, to put rainbows on things to support LGBTQ issues, why can't we get out early in front of all of this with stickers and logos that are exactly about what we're talking about? And I don't know who has the power, right? But there's certainly people way higher up in society than myself. I don't know if it's OSTP or others who go to all of the sports companies that do snow sports, right? And have them stick a logo on. We have how many Winter Olympics coming up, so that we get this advertising well out that this next IPY is coming and that what it's talking about is critical. So you have like technical companies, right, that work in the Arctic. You have zoos and animal organizations. People give billions of dollars a year to save dogs, right? So why don't we find other ways that people who are animal lovers can see a sticker that relates to, IPY, clothing companies, Fjallraven, all of them, Columbia. So I just think that we need to be way, way more strategic in terms of how we reach the public rolling into this next IPY and find the people who have these industrial connections or marketplace connections, right? So that when anybody sees whatever it is, an iceberg or whatever snappy logo we have, there's a QR code for people who use them, right? And it goes right to the fact that there's all these concerns and we're going to talk about them, right? We're going to engage them at the next IPY. I don't know how, I know how to do that, but I'm not the person to do that. We need to find big level spokespeople who can get in the room with the corporate CEOs and explain to them that this only advantages them. And frankly, it's a fraction, right, of the budget that they have. We all know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Can I just respond real quick? Oh, sorry. Right.
Michael, do you have a response to
Yeah,
Amy?
just a quick
Yeah.
response, because I think this really parallels exactly what Martin said about the military context. How is it that you find the folks who are the serious decision makers that want to listen to you and that you can inform and have an impact with? I don't know where that is. In the same way, I don't know exactly where it is in the military, and I would go to Martin for that guidance. I don't know who it is on the sort of industry side, but those are great ideas, Amy. So yeah.
Thank you.
The question is, where do we find the individuals on our side, right, who will get that office done?
Yeah.
And that's not overly difficult. We just have to start now.
Right.
Yeah. Now, with those are good thoughts, and we'll follow up on that. We do have a question from the audience, Elise. If you also speak up your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Dr. Allison Fong, and I'm a biological oceanographer and sea ice ecologist, and my primary work in polar systems has been in the Arctic. Prior to being based in the United States, I was the Mosaic leader for the ecosystems team. Many of you are familiar with Mosaic. In 2019 and 2020, we had the large Arctic drift. So I am a scientist. I come from a very strong scientific background. And I came to polar science as a postdoc, not expecting for it to change my life, and it certainly did. And I stayed at the AVI for 9 years instead of 3. So you can see how it draws people in. But the point I wanted to make here is that in the second half of the conversation, we've talked about the spaces and the structures and the systems that do or do not support the communication and the amplification of scientific value and messages to the broader public. And who we're reaching is not 9 scientists. Who we're reaching are a public that is less literate in critical thinking and connecting the dots. And it can be our responsibility, but I don't think it is should be on the onus of scientists to necessarily do that work. As an individual, I have decided to move beyond the traditional academic research trajectory that was always sort of the intended career and become an independent, freelance person who's working at the intersections of exactly the sectors you have identified: science, academia, industry, art, storytelling, multimedia. And I will tell you, it is hard, but it is so critically important to elevate, to recognize that there are persons like myself who are making progress specifically to do the work that I could not have done in a traditional academic setting or research setting. And we need funding, we need connections, and we need to be thinking so incredibly creatively and joyfully about how we can bring this incredible science to the whole world. And I will give you examples of how this is possible. The ozone hole. Who knows about the ozone hole and the huge campaign? I was a child when that was brought up. The Amazon rainforest and deforestation. Ben & Jerry's sold Crunch bars at every single zoo and every single aquarium across the world to fundraise. right? Why do kids know about whales, but not about Arctic sea ice, phytoplankton, things like that? This is about messaging, but it's also about investing greatly in the creative power that exists beyond the realms of traditional academic and research circles. But recognize that we need to no longer be silent and afraid as scientists, as researchers, to speak up on behalf of these things.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Fong. That was great. Yeah, thank you. We'll take one last question from Janet and then wrap it up here. Oh, you did? Well, it gives us some more time. That's great. Anyone has one last question? Oh, Martin, your hand was up. Sorry, Martin. Last question. You wrap this up and then we'll take a break.
Question, it's a point, but I'm reminded of this by what Twyla said a moment ago. Long ago, it was a member of faculty here at CU Boulder who described CU Boulder as a state-associated university. And I think that's a description that applies to just about all state universities throughout the nation. And that is, they're all underfunded by their states. And there are many reasons for that, but one of them is there's all that federal research money out there with large sums of overhead available to run the universities, and therefore the states don't feel obliged to put state money into their institutions of education and research and so on. So consequently, very large numbers of faculty are constantly at the grindstone of writing proposals, doing research and publishing, and it goes on and on. And if you think about this in the terms of communication and what we've heard from others in the room, this is a form of muzzling. Because where's the time for communication? And the need to communicate and the need to speak out, as we just heard, that we can no longer sit in our ivory towers doing our pure, basic, curiosity-driven research. We do need to speak up. It's not easy, it can be risky, it might be becoming riskier, but if we don't speak out, we're complicit. And we're not doing what we ought to be doing for the greater good. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, Michael, Marika, Mark, thank you so much for an exciting session. You started it off and look where it took us. It's lots of good thoughts here and lots to think about going forward. So thank you once again. And can we give a round of applause to our speakers here? Thank you.